Hi everyone, welcome to today's Sessions with Sarah. It's been a little while since we did one of these. Last month it was a public holiday, and the month before that we were all on leave because it's Christmas. So welcome back for 2023. This year is going to look a little bit different. This year we will be looking more at property law sides of things. My colleagues Karen and Ivy will be talking more about family law sides of things in their monthly Facebook Live. So if you have any family law questions, please feel free to direct them towards them. But yeah, I'm going to be focusing on property, what you should know, what you shouldn't know, and what we help with. Feel free to reach out with any requests or questions you have. But today we're going to cover something very broad, which is what to consider when buying a property. Now, obviously there's a multitude of things to consider. But what I'm talking about today is the legal things that you should consider before you buy a property. This isn't, whether the house suits your needs or it's in a good location or anything like that. This is purely the legal side of things. Agents and obviously yourself can help with those other things. The main thing that the first one, I guess not necessarily the main, is how are you going to pay for this property? That's the first thing you should consider. So there are lots of different ways you can pay for a property. Obviously the easiest one is probably to have the cash up front. The most common one is to borrow money from a bank, and if you're borrowing money from a bank you probably need a subject to finance clause, or you need to have your pre-approval organised prior to signing the contract of sale. Without these organised, you could end up in a very difficult position down the track of not being able to pay for your property, becoming in default of a contract of sale, and all the nasty ramifications that come along with that. So we always recommend before signing your contract, you know exactly how you're going to be paying for that property, whether it be clear funds or whether it be borrowing. It's always good to make a number of inquiries with brokers or banks to make sure you understand where you sit financially. It's not good enough just to have had the nod from your banker. You really need to know that you're definitely able to get that finance, and that is why so many people make their contracts subject to finance. Being subject to finance basically means that if you don't get your finance formally approved in that time window, normally about 14 days, you have the right to exit from the contract without penalty and you get your deposit back. This is a very good safeguard and prevents you from losing potentially tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars when you're unable to settle on a contract. So yes, how you are going to pay for the property is such a major consideration. Most contracts, in my experience, most properties are purchased with the assistance of a bank. It's easier if you don't, because you don't have to involve that other third party. But like I said, it's incredibly common. We work with them frequently. And banks can often take a little bit longer than you expect to get your finance approved. So if they say they're going to be 7 days, estimate for 14 days. Just provides you a little bit more coverage if needed. Second thing to consider is future use of the property. So how you want to use that property. So properties are zoned. It might be a residential zoning, farming zoning, rural living zoning, commercially zoned. So depending on what you want to use that property for, the zoning is relevant. You cannot necessarily, this is all fact on a case-by-case basis, you can't necessarily buy a property in a residential zone and knock it down and build a shopping centre. Doesn't work. Council won't allow you to do it. So when you're buying a property, you need to be conscious of what your future use of that property is going to be, and if it suits the zoning, what's on the property, what any covenants or restrictions on the property are. It can be incredibly tricky to change zoning. It's a very big undertaking, it's expensive, it's timely. So if you want to buy a house, for example, to live in, but you're a hairdresser who has the potential to work from home, you may need to check with council before you buy that property that you are actually able to operate a hairdressing business out of your bedroom or whatever you do. So incredibly important to make sure that's legal and permittable. And again, also if you have the intention of knocking down a building and building something else and using it for another purpose, or it's a house and you want to convert it to a doctor's surgery or a dental surgery or something like that, incredibly important to make those inquiries and think about what is your future use of this property going to be, because otherwise you could be a bit hamstrung and stuck in a bit of a difficult position, not being able to use the property for what you want to use it for. Thirdly, how long for settlement? So as a general rule, contracts of sale tend to settle after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. The date can be as short or as long as you want, theoretically, provided you and the vendor agree. If there's no bank involved, we can settle in a relatively quick amount of time, maybe 21 days. But if there is bank involved or whatever like that, we would say a minimum of 30 days. How long you want to settle is also relevant to if there's tenants in the property. So if there's tenants in the property, you might need to wait for them to move out. You need to wait for the vendor to move out. You need to think about what your current living arrangements are. Are you in a rental that needs to have the current lease agreement extended, or are you going to be kicked out of your rental? Is your property sold perhaps, and do you need to get out of your property in a certain amount of time and find a place to go? So how long settlement is going to be is a very important consideration, because it makes sure you have somewhere to live, or alternatively something else organised to make sure you are protected. The third one feeds into that a little bit, but vacant possession. So when you're buying a property, if you want to move into it, you ideally require vacant possession at settlement, or very shortly afterwards. What that means is there's no one else living in the property. An instance where there is not vacant possession would be that there's a tenant staying on in the property. So you have purchased a property and the property was already leased out to someone prior to the sale, and that lease continues on. Normally, if you want to vacate a tenant, it takes at least 60 days. You have to serve them notice, it goes to the agent, they have to find a new place, all that kind of stuff. So if you do want to move into a property straight away and you want that vacant possession, incredibly important to make sure you're aware of it. And if needed, make sure your settlement date is long enough for the vendor to give notice to the tenant to vacate so that you can move in on settlement. Number 5 is covenants, design guidelines, restrictions, easements, all that kind of stuff. All this information is contained in the section 32 of the vendor statement. It's very important to read this document and have your solicitors read this document prior to signing a contract of sale or purchasing a property. There's so many things in these things. It's a very broad topic to cover, but covenant could be a restriction on how you develop the property. It might be that you can only build one house. It might be that you can only build the house from brick. It might be that your fences need to be green, or your fences need to be made from wood, that you can only have one shed or something like that. It's incredibly broad what covenants and design guidelines can cover. It might be that they need to suit a certain style. I recently read one that had to suit a Tuscan style, and that any housing had to go through a governing body essentially to make sure it met their design guide requirements. As a general rule, we review these for you, but it's incredibly important that you look at these yourself as well and understand what you're signing up to. Restrictions can also include easements. So if there's an easement on the property, excuse me, there's something built across the easement perhaps that might be an issue, there might not be. It's just important to know what your obligations are. If something is built across the easement, it could be a huge issue because it could be an illegal structure. So there's quite a lot to consider with covenants and design guidelines and understanding how they play into your property purchase. Finally, I just wanted to touch briefly on buying off the plan. So it's quite common for people to buy properties off the plan. This is when it's not subdivided yet. So it's a bit of land that's still in one large piece and you only want to buy a little bit of it. Your property is buying off the plan, so subject to a subdivision. With these, it's important to be aware of your rights and the vendor's rights in terms of ending the contract, because subdividing land can be quite a lengthy and paperwork heavy process. It can often take months, it could take years, it can take a very long time. Under these contracts, it could be that you expect the property to be subdivided within 6 months, but the contract might actually say that you don't have an out to that contract if the vendor doesn't have it registered for 2 years, 3 years. I recently read that on 7 years. It's such an incredibly long amount of time. So if your goal is to buy a bit of land, build a house and get in there as quickly as possible, that may not be possible. We often have people waiting literally years after signing up for a contract of sale to make sure that they can then get settled and get into their property. So incredibly important if you're buying off the plan to understand that, plus to understand any covenants and guidelines associated with that off the plan property. It's also really important to understand if there's an owner's corporation attached to a property as well. So consider that if you're looking at a property, see if it has an owner's corporation attached. That is additional fees and charges associated with the property. And that's another thing to consider when buying a property is the outgoings associated with the property. So every property has certain outgoings associated with. The most common is probably rates. Most of us pay our rates, which is normally between $1,000 to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year on a residential block potentially. And that's something you'll need to, when you buy a property, you sign up to paying for the period of which you own that property. You have water rates often, sometimes state land tax depending on the manner in which you own the property. Like I just mentioned earlier, owner's corporation fees, all that kind of stuff. So there's a multitude of things to consider what potentially your outgoings will be once you become the legal owner of that property. That's about all from me today. So just to sum that up, it was things you need to consider when buying your property is how you're going to pay for the property, whether it be finance or clear funds. It's your future use of the property and how you intend to use it if you might need to change the current usage of the property. How long you need to settle the property and what your requirements are there. Vacant possession if you require that and what the potential downfalls are if you are unable to get that. Covenants, designs, guidelines, easements, all that kind of stuff, and how they might affect your use of the property. Buying off the plan and what that could potentially look like for you, and understanding the outgoings associated with the property and what you're signing up for in the future. So a lot of things to consider. We definitely do recommend a solicitor review all those documents before you sign up to the contract of sale. We do review them as part of our standard fee here at TBA Law. We can be contacted on 0357942334. Email us. You can email through questions. We're happy to have a chat for you and review documents as needed to help you buy your dream home or property or whatever you want to do. But if there's any questions or requests, please let us know. Happy to discuss anything in these videos should anyone make any further requests. But otherwise, thank you very much everyone, and enjoy your afternoon.